Republican Greg Walden represents most of central and southern Oregon. His statement reads, Congress has granted the executive branch certain spending authorities. I strongly object to any president acting outside of those explicit authorities to spend money that Congress has not appropriated for specific initiatives. In other words, the president can't just grab money and spend it on whatever he wants.
We're moving beyond partisanship. We're moving to the way the Constitution is intended to work.
Professor Jim Moore said the president's move shifts the loyalties in Congress.
Partisanship has been ruling that. So if your president's in office, in Congress, you just say yes to whatever that is, whether that's Democrat, Republican, depending on your party. But now we have the Republicans with their president saying you've gone a step too far, you've gone over congressional prerogatives and powers.
Southwest Washington Republican Jaime Herrera Beutler warned some conservatives may cheer today, but someday it is likely that the shoe will be on the other foot and a liberal president would have the power to disregard Congress. She also said she is against the president's move. Political analyst Len Bergstein said it is a power grab and members of Congress resent it.
They're there to be the constitutional guardians of the power of the purse. And so when a president, any president, kind of sticks his or her nose into that business, they've got to defend their institution.
Professor Moore said the long-term implications are huge, which is why we can expect a major battle over all this.
But what he's doing is saying there's an emergency because Congress didn't pass what I wanted. And that is, quite frankly, that's the road to dictatorship. Yeah. And so everybody's well aware of that. Jaime Herrera Beutler is well aware of that. And so there's a real nervousness right now.
In Portland, Pat Doris, KGW News.